I just want to say a special thanks to Nirav, who is flying out tomorrow and drove down from Austin to be with us today, and will be heading back shortly thereafter in order to make his flight. So Nirav, thanks for joining us. We're going to turn the floor over to you.
Is mic working? Good afternoon. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. It's the first time I'm using one of these fancy mics, so bear with me if you can't hear me. We live in the land of opportunity. It's true. Opportunities abound if you are wealthy. Forbes magazine every year comes out with its Forbes 400, the wealthiest 400 individuals in the country. In 1982, the average net worth of the Forbes 400 was $230 million. Fast forward to 2016, you had to have a net worth of $1.7 billion to make the list. The average net worth in 2016 was $6 billion. That is a 10-time increase from the 1982 average after accounting for inflation. Opportunities are not afforded to all equally. The reality is, by any measure, if you look at inequality, it is growing and it is deepening significantly. From 1989 to 2013, if you were the poorest 50% of families in the country, you saw your household income be completely stagnant. If you're the top 10% of families from 1989 to 2013, you saw a 400% increase in your household wealth. That's the reality that we are living in today. Inequality is deep and growing. Inequality is also inherited. If you are a child growing up in a family that has an income in the top 90th percentile, you will earn an income 3 times greater than a child who's growing up in a family with incomes in the bottom 10% of the income percentile. We are setting up a system where poverty is perpetuating itself because of this income inequality. This is the context by which the backdrop we're facing. Let me see if I can see it. Clicker challenges. Okay, no problem. I can go without it. Who needs that crutch? So if you look at some of the challenges we're facing as a community, there's 2.5 million people behind bars. There's 500,000 children that are in the foster care system. There are another 500,000 people that are persistently homeless. 40% of Americans, 40% of us, can't come up with $400. How do you sustain a shop to your family if you can't come up with $400? And so, but it's not a lack of effort. We face big challenges. We're also putting a decent amount of money into these challenges. So if you look across all governments, federal, state, local, we spend about $1 trillion annually on social service programs. This past year, philanthropic giving exceeded $400 billion. These are not small sums of money. But it's confusing to think about over $1 trillion in spend and these still seemingly intractable and growing challenges. What's the disconnect here? One, let's start with our governments. Peter Orszag and John Brinkman, 2 executives in the Obama and Bush administration, wrote a book called Moneyball for Government. In that book, they look at all federal spending, specifically federal social spending. And what they found is that of the federal social spending, only 1% has any evidence that the programming is actually achieving what it was intended to achieve. 1%. Now let's shift. Let's go to the nonprofit sector. Again, big problems. But the realities that our nonprofits facing those really enormous challenges are small. 1.4 million nonprofits approximately in the country. 2/3 of those nonprofits have balance sheets that are less than $500,000. $500,000. From 1970s, there was about 200,000 nonprofits started. Only 0.1% of those nonprofits have exceeded revenue of $50 million. The reality is that nonprofits can't access growth capital. How do you solve problems if you can't access growth capital? Right? What about the capital markets? So we used to live in this world where on one side of the house, you maximize profits. On the other side of the house, you said, let me give back. And our world those worlds are coming together right now. You see a hybrid where individuals, institutions are looking to deploy their capital, not only for some financial returns, but also measurable social returns. How do we tap into this private market to do social good? They're there, they want to help, they want to figure it out. We just need to actually tap into that resource. So this is the context that social finance, the nonprofit I work for, was created back in 2011. How do we reimagine solutions for social progress that incorporate government accountability, that give nonprofits the growth capital to achieve change? Where's the GEs of the nonprofit sector? They don't exist. And how do we tap into the private sector to really fuel that? So, first our premise started with this simple statement. We've been looking at the wrong thing for too long. Success was defined as how many people are we serving? And that's not success because we don't know how effectively we were serving those individuals. So we need to shift the narrative from an outputs world to an outcomes world. That's where we started. And then from there, it's thinking about how do we bring these three uncommon partners, governments, nonprofits, and private capital, together to make change. So the idea started in the UK in 2010, called the Social Impact Bond. We've since messed around with the name because it's not actually a bond. So we call it Pay for Success now. And how does it work? The idea is simple. First, it starts with what needs are we trying to tackle? Two, what outcomes need to be generated in order to address that need? And let's be really precise on what those outcomes are. Once you identify the outcomes, let's go out and raise private investment capital to fund one or many nonprofits to achieve those predefined outcome metrics. And only if those outcome metrics are achieved will governments, meaning your taxpayer dollars, get used to pay back investors their principal plus a potential to get a modest rate of return. So how is this idea different? A couple ways. One is traditionally right now, government gives out funding on the promise of social outcomes being achieved. Rarely do they go back and measure if those social outcomes were achieved. I go back to that 1% fact that I laid out earlier. That's one. Second is this idea of impact investing is not new. It's been around for a very long time. A large amount of impact investing goes into fixed and physical assets, which are absolutely needed. Affordable housing, federally qualified health centers, charter schools. These are all brick and mortar buildings that impact investment has funneled into. But what it has not funneled into is human and social services, because there is no underlying collateral behind that. And so the collateral that we're building here is, let's use evidence and data historically of what has worked to give confidence to private sector impact investors that they can achieve positive outcomes through the program. And that's how we can go out and raise private capital for our work. So let me bring this to life. And how does this work? So we have a project that launched about a year and a half ago with the Department of Children and Families in Connecticut. We found that 50% of the cases of child abuse and neglect in the child welfare system in Connecticut was a result of parents dealing with substance use. So like many states and communities and families in this this country, the opioid epidemic is hitting Connecticut pretty hard. And so, in order to address this, the Department of Children and Families said, you know what, we need to get at the root cause, which is substance use. Let's go out and find a program that can help put parents on the recovery to substance use, while also teaching these positive parenting principles so we can rejoin kids with the family members if the house is safe. We raised over $11 million from a range of impact investors, from foundations to community development financial institutions to an insurance company to financial institutions, and provided that funding to a number of nonprofits to deliver an evidence-based program called family-based recovery. That was steeped in a number of randomized control trials and had operations in Connecticut to scale. And so we launched that program a couple of years ago, and there's 4 different outcome metrics that are going to be measured, which will dictate payments from government back to those impact investors. The first outcome metric is enrollment. And you may ask, enrollment? Isn't that one of those output things that you talked about earlier? Not in this case. Substance use, there's 2 big steps that you need. One is to acknowledge you have a problem, and 2 is, the second is take a step to say, I'm going to try to address that. And enrollment signifies that. And that's why that's an outcome metric, and an important one, because you need that step to get on the pathway to the positive outcome. The second one is, can we actually increase the placement rates of children in the child welfare system back into homes, where they need to be versus bouncing around the system. Third is exactly that. Can we reduce what's called the re-referral rate? So think about a revolving door in and out of the child welfare system for each individual. Can we reduce the turns on those revolutions and those doors? Is the third metric. And then the fourth metric is a reduction in substance use. We're doing toxicology screens to see if we actually can have people go on the pathway of substance use. And do we expect everyone to go cold turkey? No, that's not how substance use works, right? But we do expect to see over time that over the population there's a reduction in the instances of substance use. So that's an example where we have leveraged the power of the capital markets to put into programming to try to achieve root cause challenges in Connecticut that is driven by outcomes. So that's the example that I wanted to highlight. So if you look across the globe, it's still a pretty nascent movement, Pay for Success is. But it's growing quite rapidly. So across the globe, 24 countries have executed Pay for Success projects. There are over 100 Pay for Success projects out there with $500 million in resources being paid for. And so, as a nonprofit, what we are trying to do is have conversations with these 3 sectors, nonprofits, government, and impact investors, to find the alignment. Where are there opportunities to draw in investment capital that puts the risk on their dollars and not government capital? And if we do the process right, we can have both human change, which is real measurable results for individuals, but more importantly, over the long term, we should get better policy change. Because right now, there is a dearth of data and information on what works and what doesn't work, and how to scale programs effectively. And if we do our job right, we get the human impact, but we also get the systems impact over the long term, which is how do we reorient dollars to programs that work, and how do we scale them such that we move the needle on some of the gnarly challenges we're facing. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to comment, so it should work a little bit better. So next we have Bob Bridge, who is the founder and executive director of the Southwest Angel Network, SWAN. But Bob is also a Rice alum. Go Owls. Woo-hoo. Yes, exactly. We are pleased and honored to have you here today, and our second speaker in a row. Bob drove down to join us from Austin, so thank you, Bob. Please join me in welcoming Bob.
So I thought I'd start off with a little audience participation. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in response to 3 options. you're really interested in for-profit social impact or nonprofits, or you're still trying to figure it out. So all of you who are really focused on nonprofit ventures, can you raise your hand? For-profit? Wow, trying to figure it out? Good. So my background is a long time ago, an advanced engineering degree, worked in corporate America and technology and marketing roles at big technology companies. And then by accident in 1985, I got into a startup. And I started having fun at work for the first time. And I did 30 years of high-tech startups, the last 15 as a founding CEO, mainly semiconductors, hardware things, took a lot of cash. I raised $60 million for those ventures over 15 years because to get an MVP for semiconductors, you need about $18 million. So a little different world than the world of Amazon Web Services and other things. So we heard a couple of very accomplished nonprofit leaders say, next time I'm going to go for-profit because it has to be easier. I think the grass is always greener, the other side of the fence. I will tell you that raising money for a for-profit startup is hard. Investors will not likely pay much attention until you have revenue. So you need to do some early marketing and sales and engineering work to get investors interested. How do you pay for that? Your savings, your credit card, your friends and family will give you some money. Well, friends and family can work pretty well until Thanksgiving comes and you say, well, I've lost all that money. It's a full-time job for the CEOs. Until you have a clear path to profitability, the CEO is going to spend 80% of his time fundraising, or her time fundraising, talking to investors, refining the story. Okay, we've got the first money in, now I start raising the next money in, now I got to start raising the next money in. It's tough, it's hard. It's just as hard, I think, to get one of these off the ground as a nonprofit. And if you look at our angel network, we're in Austin. We invest in for-profit startups. You know, in any given year, we have maybe 120 applicants, and we invest maybe in 8 of those. So, you know, it's tough. It's tough. We do look for a dual bottom line, meaning that convince us that you have some meaningful social impact, and convince us you can make a profitable business. And don't go say that I have this cool idea and some HR person in Apple is going to buy my product. Tell us about the individual in Apple who has a specific job challenge that you're going to solve with your offering, and that person has a budget to pay you to solve it. And so, you know, we need a lot of validation on the customer side, the payer side. Revenue is a good proof of that. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about angels. Oh yeah, I got to go like this. Okay. So here's a woman who has some wealth, and she's thinking about making an investment in social impact companies. And the way she thinks about it, I have a lot of my resources here, maybe 95% of my money I'm going to put into either low risk or high return investments, maybe in the stock market, some bonds. And I have a little bit of money, maybe 5% I'm going to use to give back. And I have 2 choices: philanthropy, which actually has some tax benefits in the next year, or making an investment with a return. Well, how does she make a return on an investment in a for-profit company? There's really 2 choices. She gets equity, some stock ownership, and then the company has an acquisition or an additional public offering of stock. Or there's some non-equity way for her to get money back. That's what I'm going to be talking about in just a moment. I would also add that in our angel network, we now have 28 angels. Impact is in the eye of the investor. Everyone has their own idea of what is impactful, what they want to invest in. And some of the women like her are in a formal network, and some are just individuals floating out there in the ethos somewhere. If you go through a network, you'll be a lot more rigorous due diligence than if you go find an individual. But the networks are much easier to find, to talk to. So there's trade-offs there. So, go like this. Oh, too many times. So, if I want to give back and make a return, there's a couple of ways I can do this. I can look for a lower risk, lower return option, or a higher risk, higher return option. And when I think about the higher risk, higher return, I think of that arrow for risk should be going up also. That's backwards. Unicorns. You know, if you heard of unicorns, how many have heard of the idea of a unicorn? This is like Uber. They go out and raise, approximately $2 billion or $1.5 billion over time, and they're going to own the market for social transportation, and they're going to make billions of dollars for the investors. And so we'll talk some more about that. There's a new term floating around, which is zebras, which is a response to the excesses of the unicorn world. They're saying we don't like this unicorn model of funding for-profit companies. So unicorns look to disrupt markets. They have this idea that we should be able to grow revenue 5% per week. That's really aggressive. And give a 10x return to investors. So often you see companies that are valued by the investors at $1 billion before they actually are profitable. It's just a crazy world. And there's at least 300 of those now, mainly in the Bay Area. People are that way. Zebras, on the other hand, are really more like a social enterprise company would be. The goal is to have some sort of long-term sustainable growth, be responsible, balance profit with purpose. So, and maybe a 2x return. So I often think about this, the unicorn's looking for a home run, and the zebra's looking for a single or a double, at higher probability of success. So, the end game up there, the second line down, the goal of the unicorn is to have an exit, a big liquidity event, where all the investors get their money back with a tax return. Zebras want to get profitable, sustainable. There's some more things down there. Priority, user acquisition. How many riders can Uber get? Customer success is how a zebra might think about it. So one way of getting zebra financing that does not require giving up equity is something called revenue-based financing. And the basically work is basically a loan. The investors give you money, and you pay it back with a lot of interest because it's a high-risk loan. And what's the advantage of the company is that the company does not give up any equity to the investors, which is kind of nice because you still own the company. The other thing that's nice is no investors reading that index saying, when are you going to get acquired? So you don't need to go through this 5 to 7 years to get acquired. And the other thing about the revenue-based financing, we'll talk some more about how it works, is that the payments scale with your revenue. It's not like having a fixed loan where every month you have to pay $25,000 over 36 months, where your revenue, your income in the first year is maybe just a few $1,000s. This payment schedule is tied to the growth in your revenue. So here's an example. Typically with this model, you can raise 25 to 33% of your current annual revenue rate. And you will pay it using 4 to 8% of your gross revenue. And then your total repaid is 1.5 to 2 times what you borrowed. And typically that takes 3 to 5 years. So it kind of translates to maybe a nearly usurious interest rate, maybe 19%. But at this stage of a company, there's no way to get a bank loan. You're just too high risk. And so the investors say, we'll give you this money. And so here's an example. If you currently have a $20,000 interest revenue rate and your annual revenue is $240K, you can raise $80K and you repay $160. Well, these aren't very big numbers, are they, in terms of raising money for your company? There's another example. If you're $100K revenue per month, you can raise $400K. Well, that's still not a whole lot of money because at that rate, if your startup's doing $100,000 a month, you can probably raise $5 to $10 million from venture capitalists. But so there are some limitations here. The other limitation is that if we fund a company with these terms, no other investor can do that term either because now the company will be owing, 4 to twice that per month. They can't stack the interest payments and the payments and the debts on top of each other. So if we let a company with this and other investors wanted to follow, they had to go to their own term sheets and do something different like convertible debt or equity. Okay, so this can work well if you have revenue. If you don't have revenue, don't think about revenue-based financing. And the revenue is growing so that in the future, these payments get less and less significant to you in terms of your bottom line. and you have gross margins, and you can afford to pay that. Now there's another variation. There's a guy on the West Coast who's doing a variation on this, which combines revenue-based financing and equity. And they'll give you this loan, say $400,000. What they initially do is they buy equity with that, and then you pay them back, and the company pays the investor back, and along the way buys back half of the stock from the investor. So over time, the investor position gets to be smaller. I haven't done one of these yet, but it's interesting. This company on the West Coast is an accelerator, Fledge, and they've done like 60, 70 investments like this, and people have gone through their accelerator, a social impact accelerator. So the last slide, this is our first revenue-based financing we did. Danny Kopru here in Houston, has a company that's distributing prescription discount cards to people who need those cards, going through food banks and other nonprofits. Love Danny. He's an energetic guy. He was working for the Houston Department of Health, and someone came to try to pitch this idea to the Houston Department of Health, and they didn't know how to talk to a government or a nonprofit. And Danny heard this, and he says, I'm going to go get that contract. So he started off actually with a lead customer before he started his company, which is a great way to go. And we closed that just in the last couple of months. So that's my story.
Thanks. Thanks, Bob.
Change the date on that. No, I'm sorry. You forgive me? Just move it like this.
So we've heard about paper success models. We've heard about revenue-based financing models, and now we're going to hear more about community-based crowdfunding. So you have Jeff Kaplan, the principal of NextSeed, who's going to share a bit about debt-based community crowdfunding. And while Jeff did not drive in from Austin this morning, Jeff, I'm pretty sure is actually on his deathbed right now. Like he is, we'll all be sterilizing our hands and things when we afterwards. But he is up, and I am grateful to you, Jeff, for making the time and powering through, despite the fact you're fighting off a cold. So please, we look forward to hearing more about NextSeed.
Has anyone here heard of NextSeed before? Oh, wow, awesome. So I'm an entrepreneur. My background prior to being a part of NextSeed was opening small businesses, and I always tried to open businesses that had some sort of impact. I was a co-founder of New Living and Axelrod Beer Garden, which is kind of a community-driven, public-private feeling visual art bar. So, and I'm working on a project called Houston Needs a Swimming Hall, which is, I think, also going to be aligned with NextSeed. But we really are a different sort of finance company. We started off doing crowdfunding, and I'll speak to how we're evolving and growing. But really, what we're doing is very different than other forms of crowdfunding. People have heard of Indiegogo and Kickstarter. We really are an investment-based model. So we have a partner bank. When you invest with us, the money is held with the partner bank, and people literally are getting interest in their account until it's vested in a project. We've done, since we started, about 50 deals, and our batting average is over 90% in terms of deals that we put on the platform and deals that have closed. And we haven't had any businesses shut down yet, which is surprising. But part of our premise is that by bringing in the local community, we're also de-risking investing in these sorts of businesses that are typically considered very high risk. So the industry for crowdfunding is for sure growing. And all of this was made possible through a change in legislation in the Jobs Act, which went into effect in 2016. The reason we're based in Texas is because Texas law deregulated before the national law changed. Prior to 2016, it was literally illegal to have more than 35 investors invest in a local business. So if somebody thought something was awesome in their community or their neighborhood, there was a coffee shop that a friend of theirs wanted to open, if they weren't an accredited investor, meaning if they didn't have an audited net worth of $1 million or make a couple $100,000 a year of income, they couldn't invest in that business. And it's something that most people don't even realize. And I learned that when we were opening Backstory. We wanted to allow the neighbors from the third ward and from the community to invest $100 or $200 and to literally own a stake in our business. And it was prior to the law changing, we ended up engaging our attorney, and it was going to cost over $60,000 to do this thing called a Reg D offering. Has anyone heard of that? So to open a community beer garden, it's almost impossible to spend that kind of money. So we actually got around the restriction by having people that worked on the project, our artists, our graphic designers, our architect, who were materially involved, they were able to invest in it. But it was really an exercise in futility. And we, as entrepreneurs, had to deal with 42 K1s and all the investor reporting. So what we're offering through this is a very efficient financial tech solution to community-based investing. So we did in 2016, we did the first IPO of a small business in American history, and we'll speak to that in a few minutes. But we had done deals only in Texas, but not until 2016 did we do national deals. So the challenges of a small business today, to raise money are very, very severe. Like if you don't have a proven concept, you either have to sign your life away, you have to be a net depositor in a local bank if you want to get a traditional loan, or you have to know a lot of rich people. Like you have to have a network, or you can't go start something. So what happens is the same type of people end up getting to open up small businesses, and we are not incubating new businesses in our cities, especially in underserved neighborhoods, the way that we need to, and the way that America used to. So what we're doing, we're expanding our platform, but what we're offering really is, up until now, a form of debt. It's either a revenue share or a traditional note, but most lenders treat our investment as a form of debt. It's almost like preferred equity. Does anyone know what that means? Cool. Okay, so basically we're doing non-secured debt in these businesses. So there's no personal guarantees, there's no security for businesses that have some sort of community impact. So the deals that work for us, our thesis is based on the idea that connecting local money to local businesses is de-risking these sorts of investments. So we need projects and we need entrepreneurs that are passionate and are committed to a place or to their neighborhood to really align well with our platform, as we're learning more and more as we go forward. So what we're doing is really proving that the value of the community in a business is worth more than having a typical investor. So and we're measuring that. We have not figured out the exact data on a per spend, per investment that we will, but the value is there and it's powerful. Like when you typically open up a small business, you might have 3 wealthy people or 5 wealthy people each putting in $20,000. But if you have 1,000 people putting in $100 each of those 1,000 people have so many other friends that they're going to bring until they get their money back. So that's really the premise of our project. It's kind of going back to the old world of community banking in some ways with a financial tech platform. And we believe as a business that our current banking system doesn't really work for small businesses. And it's become harder and harder to start a new idea, especially if it's something that hasn't been proven or hasn't been done. So in some ways, I often describe what we're doing as kind of a cross between an old world community banking model with almost a journalistic lens, because we need some sort of an intrinsic, honest story that's connected to the community to make this work. So with our platform, if you can go to our website, it's nextseed.com. You can literally go online and invest directly in a business. And I think in terms of like how this is an impact, we're seeing that people want to be invested in their cities and their community. It wasn't possible before that. One of the most shocking things about our platform is that we have thousands of people, mostly from Texas, that keep their money in their NextSeed account, unallocated, looking for deals, which means either A, we need more deals, which we do, or B, that people really have a desire to de-risk their own portfolios, because right now, most people that have a 401k or have a typical savings, with their company, a typical IRA or whatever that is, have no access to invest in a local business. So it's all invested in like a typical blue chip stock or S&P type standard investment. So we're seeing that there's like a huge demand, and if 5% of people's retirement could be invested in their local community, the impact on that is massive. And also one other thing I didn't mention in the law changing is that people can only invest up to 5% of their yearly income across all of these sorts of investments. So the way it was written, it was designed to allow people to take what is clearly a highly risky investment without risking everything they have and going broke. So what we offer today is two products, but we're rapidly expanding that. One is a typical term loan. Typically, it's in the mid to high teens range, or it's a revenue share. Each deal is different. So a typical deal might be 5% of revenue until 1.4, 1.5x on the capital's return. And we typically need a 5-year amortization. So all of that cash in the return has to be paid back in full within 5 years. We've only done this sort of product up until now. We are at the 11th hour of getting our broker-dealer license, which essentially will make NextSeed act as a grassroots version of investment banking. We will be able to do place-based financing with our own money that we're investing in the community alongside our current Reg CF offering that was passed in the Jobs Act. So this is one example. This is actually the first project that we did after the national law change. So literally it was the first IPO of a small business post the Jobs Act. We raised $396,000 from 227 investors to start the Native, which is a boutique hostel hotel. And really, in many ways, created a new category for the hospitality industry. They're expanding nationally now, and it was a weird thing. Who's ever heard of a boutique hostel hotel? And it's just like the market had never seen that before, and there wasn't a traditional source. They've proven this category that other people are following now. So what we're doing, and what my role is in NextSeed, is we're forming a group called NextSeed Neighborhood that is really looking at how we're going to align investment in these sorts of businesses with the real estate. Because for so long, capital markets consider real estate to be a safe asset class, and all of the things that go in the building, the small business, is considered risky. So we are starting a local fund of sorts to allow people in the community to literally go online or to invest through this sort of vehicle in local neighborhoods and local cities, where they're not just investing in one thing, but they're investing in a group of projects that are having impact on their community and on their city. And we're going to beta test that in Houston, in the inner city, in the East End, 5th Ward, 2nd Ward, those areas. But we're really looking at it through an impact lens without over describing that. I mean, we are backed. I mean, our partners are impact investors, and they are. I mean, as it was stated earlier, there's not one specific metric that you look at to say whether something's having impact or not. But what we're doing is having direct impact on the neighborhoods that we're investing in, and we're looking at how we can invest in entrepreneurs and de-risk those investments, especially in communities where people are committed to a place, committed to a neighborhood, and doing something new that wouldn't happen otherwise. So that's it for now. We'll take. There's one more.
No, we're going to do questions now.
Great.
So
Awesome.
Join me in thanking Jeff.
Yeah, I am dealing with the feedback. So thanks for dealing with me.
So we're going to have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to kick us off with one, then I'm going to turn the questions over to the audience. So first of all, thank you. Hearing more about how your social finance is helping mobilize capital markets, is it focusing on social impact activity? Bob, thinking about how you activate capital for revenue generating ventures that are not quite to the point of being venture backable yet. And Jeff, really engaging in neighbors and communities and supporting businesses through crowdfunding. Thank you all. I think these are really interesting and creative models for us to think about. I would love to hear from each of you about what are the other trends that you're seeing? What things are you seeing when people are talking about wanting to put money into impact investing? Are they thinking about it differently? Are they thinking about different asset classes than perhaps they have before? What are you starting to see in this space? Any trends you want to share?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure it's a trend, but it's hard to find angel investors who want to have an impact focus. In Austin, we have the Central Texas Angel Network with maybe 220 members, and they're like this big oak tree, and we're this little sapling coming up in their shade with this sort of vertical market focus. And so, it's still hard to find angels. I only spend maybe 20% of my days and hours on recruiting angels, because I have all this operational stuff to do, but I probably spend 80% of my mental angst on recruiting angels. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we live in such a small niche within the impact investing world, but a couple trends that I'd highlight here. One is that Jeff alluded to this. Just generally, it seems like high quality deals is a barrier to capital flowing into the space. Is something that is something that we're continually working on. And then the second piece is that we're starting to branch out and think about how do you overlay and measurable outcomes on existing financial streams. So think about funding for charter schools that's driven through various different sources, but how do we better understand if those charter schools are actually delivering on positive educational outcomes for individuals, and is there a way you can start linking financing to some existing financial markets that are around the built environment? So environment, education are examples of that.
Let me just add one more thing. So before I started the network, I was told that deal flow was going to be hard. It hasn't been hard. And once you fill out a shingle saying you have money available, people find you.
I think the biggest challenge is investing in Main Street businesses and small and medium-sized businesses. It's allowing people to understand what they're investing in, because they're risky. And people, I mean, like the city has caught the imagination of so many people in America today. And there's this new legislation that's passing called Opportunity Zone legislation, which there's a lot of issues with it. But it's going, in terms of like a macro trend that aligns with what we're doing, I think it's going to lead to a lot of investment in inner cities and hopefully investment in small businesses and not just in the real estate. And I think that figuring out how people can participate there are so many people that want to play the role of angels that aren't able to invest $100,000, but they want to invest $100 or $200. And I think the more we can professionalize this ecosystem around local investing in our cities, the more impact we can have.
It's fantastic. Patrick,
So Jeff, are you doing equity or is it all lunch?
So now that we're getting our broker-dealer license, we're doing equity. Next year we will be doing we have our first equity deal that we're going to launch next year, and we'll be raising money in businesses
you're going to
and
put it in
in
an Opportunity Zone fund, and then
we're figuring that out, but we will be doing equity, investing in equity raises.
So Jeff, I know you talked about investing in small businesses in urban communities. So I wanted to just ask the question about gentrification. And so we know that when an influx of money and small businesses come into, underserved communities, it kind of sprawls gentrification. So how are you all working to make sure that some of those local businesses are actually local and diverse, and getting the platform out to more diverse?
Such an important question. I mean, one thing I think that not just in Houston, but cities all over America, neighborhoods are changing, and people are moving back in. And I think you have to get really nitty-gritty. You have to look at the pricing that new businesses are offering, and making sure that it's not just for rich people. Like when somebody comes in and says to us they want to open a coffee shop, like their menu can't start the price of a coffee at $4. They have to have a cup of coffee at $2. And I think the other thing that we're doing on a local, because we're in the community and we're working with a lot of entrepreneurs, the biggest single risk to Next Seed and the challenge of our business since we're not getting any personal security or collateral, like we're really banking on the community, it's partner risk, it's control partner risk, and we need to invest in teams. So what we're trying to get better and better at is harnessing local entrepreneurial talent from neighborhoods and aligning them with control partners who have run other successful businesses. So if somebody like David Buer or Bobby Hugel would put his name or take a 5 or 10% stake in a business for somebody from a neighborhood, that will de-risk our investment in that business. So because we are essentially investing in somebody who doesn't have anything other than the reputation to back it up with. So we need teams of people, and it takes different alignment, like unsuspecting partnerships that haven't existed in the past to make this sort of model work. Because you need to cater to people from the neighborhood and people that have been in the neighborhood, and you need to hire people from the neighborhood, but you also have to cater to people that are moving into the neighborhood to create new experience. And I think that's one of the things we learned from Exora, because we really tried to listen to the community and hire from the community and program from the community. And our goal was to create the most inclusive bar in public-private filling space by doing something new. So I think we have to harness new experience.
This question is for Jeff. It's regarding the burden associated to the small business or the community business. To have to report, to have to track, and also to present information once you have a deal, right? Because it's going to be a 3-5 years relationship,
right.
Or is everything related to your platform that is doing this job?
So, right. So in terms of how do we track everything? Is that
yes, and reporting and also
right.
paying back, including paying back.
So the reason why that we couldn't do it with our own the businesses that I run is because you can't do that unless it's automated. So everything we do is through a tech platform. So it's monthly reporting, it's monthly distributions of cash. Even if you're getting a $5 check or $10 check, it's automatically distributed from the business to the Nextseed account. We go into the business's account and we distribute it to 1,000 investors. And we require regular reporting, and all of those compliance issues go through us. That's the value of what we're doing, because we handle all the investor reporting, all the PPM, all the legal, all of that work that is really hard to figure out. We're kind of a clearinghouse that's automating it to make it efficient.
Hi, my name is Keisha Simmons. I just have a question about whether any of you, I know you're doing a lot of creative financing. Have you considered, or are you using the blockchain at all to sort of layer financing? And if so, can you give examples of how you might have done that? And does that actually work sort of in the local Houston or even Texas at large, or is it just too far advanced and maybe they're just not ready?
So when companies come to us to talk about blockchain, I say, tell me again what your social mission is and how this helps you do your social mission. I don't care about whether it's a relational database or blockchain. Tell me how you're impacting the community. So for technology investors, blockchain can be very attractive, but we hear a lot of buzzwords. What's the new buzzword? Drones, I don't know, blockchain, Bitcoin. I don't care about that. I care about the social impact.
It's like the Wild West blockchain. I mean, I think that there's a lot of good that can come from it. I mean, one of the reasons people don't want to invest in local businesses is because you end up with an LP, with a limited partnership position in a small business that you might not ever be able to get out of, even if it keeps growing. And I've been in that position. I've on many sides of that. So having the ability to somehow create liquidity is good. And we think that that's something that we need to do.
The question is for Marie.
1 second, please. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Next up.
Oh, thank you. This is so fascinating. The part of me that's really sort of skeptical of capitalism is also very skeptical of like some of the things that we're talking about. And I'm wondering, so then, what type of deals, what type of communities are still, would you say, suited for philanthropy versus for this innovative financing?
Good question. I think one is just going back to magnitude, right? Philanthropic giving in the last year was $400 billion. Government giving was $5.5 trillion. A lot more money in the capital market. So they're relatively, philanthropy is pretty small. And so from my vantage point, we think about philanthropy as risk-taking capital. So if you have a brand new idea that's worth the bet for social change, I think philanthropy is a great capital that is seeking risk for social purposes, and it makes complete sense. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have this program that has been proven over and over and again that it works, philanthropy is not the vehicle that you're going to get to scale for that program. You need to think about other types of capital to migrate those programs to. So in the way a simplified version is that, look, you have early stage social programs, probably philanthropy. Once they're proven to work at scale, government should probably be the best actor to scale that, unless there is a social entrepreneurship model that can be the fuel for that organization or that idea to expand further.
I would just add that, you know, when for-profit companies, you want them to be able to scale revenue so they can get to an exit, get acquired more typically. And that means they generally have some kind of technology platform they can scale nationally. And so companies that come to us who are services companies that have a local impact, we don't understand how they can scale to the point of getting enough revenue, say $40, $50 million, where they can be acquired and give in case of an equity investment, give return.
I think it's important to recognize that some things just shouldn't be businesses. Our government's needed severely to solve problems, and you know, the role of a social enterprise, I think, is to identify a market-to-market-based solution for something that can be solved more efficiently. And if it can be done more efficiently as a business, and it can grow, and you don't have to raise money every year as a nonprofit, that's something that should be a social enterprise. And there wasn't an ecosystem to go do that, to raise capital that was looking to have that sort of a direct impact on a specific problem until recently. So it's exciting that we're looking at new ways to capture value that are efficient, but for sure, like, you nonprofits and the government.
This question is for Nirav. I've followed social finance for a number of years, and a lot of your projects seem to be international. When you consider local projects, and you mentioned the one in Connecticut, what are you looking for with regards to a successful project for social bonds, and what does the relationship or the pitch to a local government look like?
So there are a number of social finance organizations throughout the world. We're all different legal entities, but under a global brand. And so Social Finance US, if you will, has launched 8 Pay for Success projects, and we have about 13 in the pipeline right now. If you look at the US, there are 24 Pay for Success projects, slightly, I think it's closer to 22 Pay for Success projects. In terms of what we're looking for, one is a couple of different things. One, is there a government that's willing to think about delivering progress differently versus let me buy pens and papers over here or outputs versus let me actually buy outcomes. So that's one big thing that we're looking for. Second is, are there issue areas where it makes sense for this type of financing to actually play a role to advance outcomes and advance policy versus philanthropy or social entrepreneurship models, right? Is the second piece we're looking for. A third piece we're looking for are programs grounded in some sort of data and evidence. Again, what investors are betting on at the end of the day are two things. Is there evidence, historical evidence, that this program is going to achieve a certain level of outcomes? And two, how much confidence do I have in the organization that's delivering that program? Or are the two things that investors are betting on, or the biggest things that they're betting on? So we're looking for evidence of program working, but also looking at the capacity and the skill set of the organization itself. What is the leadership? What is their track record with scaling? What is their relationship with the target population? How are they incorporating data into their decision-making process to refine as they go? Are all factors that we think about when pursuing projects.
Thank you.
Hi, this question is also for Jeff. So the neighborhood am I getting the name right? Neighborhood. So that sounds really fascinating to me. One, because in a way you'd be diversifying your portfolio, right? So if you're investing in the neighborhood, it's not just one business, then it lowers your risk, I would assume. But how will you all, I can see that being a very exciting tool to lift a neighborhood, but how will you all also make sure that, you know, the culture of the neighborhood sustains itself and the investment coming in is intertwined with the culture of the neighborhood to sustain that?
It's such a good question. I think it's largely about authenticity. And I think that doing creative placemaking projects is defined by pulling, I mean, literally finding entrepreneurs that are from those neighborhoods and from those communities to create something authentic. And I think creating equity in businesses where the ownership, the financial ownership of those businesses allows for the stakeholders to be the owner, the people that are from the community that are reflecting some sort of a unique experience is the best answer I have today. Because I think we have the opportunity to do it right. And Houston is, we're the most diverse city in the US. And we have so many neighborhoods that are changing, and we have so many neighborhoods that kind of screwed it up because they didn't think about that. But I think respecting cultural integrity is a part of the way that we want, like I would hope that we can create equity.
Hey Jeff. Okay, so kind of along those same lines, just out of curiosity, how are you, two-pronged question, how are you finding entrepreneurs for the investment? And second, how many of those entrepreneurs are coming from very low-income areas? So, like your example with the boutique hostel, hotel, whatever it was, very interesting. I'm guessing that's not going to be in a third world community, right? So, along the lines of the questions that have been asked, of, how many of these businesses are coming out of communities that probably need the most investment?
Well, interesting. If you look at a map of where things are happening, it's often in the east side of downtown, not just in Houston, but that's in East Austin. It's in former industrial areas that are becoming the coveted neighborhoods today. And it's like so yes, it is in neighborhoods like that, but it's about who is opening the business and who owns the equity and who it's serving. And we haven't completely figured that out, but I think we have to get better at doing that. It's a huge opportunity and a huge need. But most of the work that we're doing is, we're seeing that our projects are largely entrepreneurs that don't understand finance because they didn't come from a family that talked about finance. Most of our issuers are second generation Americans. They're families of immigrants that came here in the last 50 years. We're serving people that are non-traditional entrepreneurs, but the projects are not necessarily only serving or specifically serving underserved community.
This question is not for Jeff.
Okay, good. Thank you.
For everybody. My question is setting up a venture capital for overseas social objective. Have you ever done anything like that? And what would be the differentiation in setting up, or is it feasible or is not feasible? So the question is, setting a venture capital for social enterprise overseas, mostly for LDC countries. Is the question clear?
Microphone?
Oh, you can't hear me? I'm sorry. Oh.
Jeff is using one with the lapel.
Well, I would just say that no one in our angel network has any experience with overseas investing. We don't understand the tax regulation kind of attributes, so we haven't really considered those. I mentioned before that there was a investor in the West Coast who, in his accelerator, has done like 60 investments of revenue sharing with equity, and half of his has been in African countries. So there is, I can put you in contact with them and you can talk to them.
Do we have one final question from the audience?
This question is for Nirav. So bringing in third-party investors, impact investors, into these pay-for-success models can oftentimes create the information demand that can be burdensome. How would you address that in terms of the ongoing measurement of performance, processes, inputs, outputs that would then be imposed by that sort of model?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I think if we're going to get better at delivering social services, we need information. And so there is a cost associated with that, that one of the benefits that what we're bringing is because it's impact investor capital, there aren't necessarily all the strings tied to it that government dollars bring to it. So this idea of we shouldn't fund overhead, which personally I think is kind of ridiculous because you need to build infrastructure and overhead to get good organizations there, right? So with impact investment capital, we're able to bring in other resources to help infrastructure that's necessary for the type of real-time data that's needed. And a lot of that, there's technology solutions that are out there, Salesforce being a simple one, that nonprofits can tap into to get information. So I think one is just needed in order for us to improve. Two, the impact investors provide an avenue to fund that where the governments don't have to pay unless they actually see those measurable outcomes. And then the last piece is that, and I didn't say this in the beginning, is the measurement of the outcomes actually happens by an independent evaluator that everyone agrees to and is independent. And so their job here is specifically to be able to take in all that data and crunch it, which relieves the nonprofit from having the responsibility for taking in big volumes of data and then crunching it for the outcomes.
So I have one final question for the panelists to wrap us up. Bob said something really important in the beginning, that impact is in the eye of the beholder, and that many of your angels may not always agree on what impact actually is. So I would love to hear, because it's always a hot topic of conversation, how are you measuring impact? What does impact look like for you, and how are you measuring impact? And so Nirav, obviously measurement's a critical aspect of any project that you take on. If you can't measure it, there's no way to do a pay-for-success model. I would love to hear about it from the portfolio perspective of social finance. Bob, both from your individual investments, how are you assessing those, and then your own personal portfolio? And same, Jeff, I think a lot of the questions that came out today were very much around the financing mechanism and enablement. It's really interesting, but where's the impact, or are you sure it's all positive impact? And so I would love to hear more from each of you really briefly on how you're measuring and thinking about your impact either at the project level or at the portfolio level.
Great question. We are starting to build out our own, since we require this for our projects, we thought it'd be helpful to do this internally as well. And so we're about 8 years old right now, and the first 3 to 4 years was just going around and talking about what this crazy idea of pay for success was. So we're getting to the maturity level where we can assess our own impact, and how we're thinking about it right now is an aggregation of the impact from each of the individual projects is one dimension. The other dimension is really about how are we changing funding flows at state, local, and federal levels to either have a performance outcomes orientation layered onto it where there is some sort of link between payments and outcomes, and how do we convert dollars to be thinking about outcomes orientation. And then also, and this is kind of 2 degrees of separation on kind of direct impact as we think about it, can we draw more impact investment space into pay for success? So how do you get different institutions that are not doing measurable social outcomes, might be working in kind of ESG, for example, how can we draw them in to invest in social programs is another way that we're thinking about measuring success. But it's evolving.
Well, most of the companies that apply to us are either trying to improve educational outcomes, or healthcare outcomes, or protecting the environment, or helping disadvantaged groups. And we ask each of them to quantify, qualify, describe their impact. And it's up to them to convince us that they're having impact and how they're going to measure that. So we don't try to enforce any kind of metric on them, but we ask them to convince us that their social impact.
We're learning. for sure, with Nixie and Nixie neighborhood, but I think what's going to be super important as we embark on our urban impact fund and all of our initiatives is the amount of equity that we're creating for businesses that are owned by people from the community and multi-generational families that are participating in partnerships to create equity and build businesses that are unique and indigenous to that neighborhood. So I think how we measure that over time is where we will have the most direct impact in cities, starting with Houston.
Please join me in thanking our speakers today. We're gonna take a few minutes break, maybe a little bit longer than the last time. So let's plan for about 20-25 minutes. We'll let you reconvene for our final panel, which is focused on investing in for-profit ventures. I do want to say one thing, as you continue to mix and mingle and continue these conversations, there was a lot of conversation about the use of blockchain and the use of blockchain in social impact ventures. We actually have a blockchain entrepreneur here. Kim, raise your hand, of Topple. And so if you want to hear about how she's using blockchain in the social impact space in order to track projects and project funding and finance internationally, please grab her during this break and chat about that. So Kim, raise your hand. That's right. Yeah, not going to be happy about me doing this, but that's okay. So please take a break, continue the conversation, and we'll be back in just a few minutes for our final panel of the day. Thank you. Sorry for improvising. So fine. Okay.